The day the sun stood still, the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the birth of modern America. Prologue. Dallas, November 22, 1963. The morning light over Dallas shimmered on chrome and glass like a promise. At 11:37 a.m., Air Force One sliced through a cloudless sky, carrying the most photographed man in the world, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and the weight of an anxious nation. The president looked rested, almost glowing, despite the long week of speeches and political tension. Beside him, Jacqueline Kennedy wore her now iconic pink suit, Chanel wool, the color of innocence and vitality, a contrast to the silent undercurrent of fear that followed every public appearance he made. When the aircraft's door opened at Love Field, the crowd erupted. The sound was not just admiration, it was relief. America's young leader had arrived safely again. But among the cheers, cameras, and white-gloved hands, somewhere in the crowd, someone watched not with joy, but with purpose. At 12:30 p.m., history stopped breathing. 3 shots echoed through Dealey Plaza. The first missed. The second struck the president in the back. The third tore through his head. In the confusion, the world fractured into disbelief, fear, and conspiracy. Within an hour, the man who embodied America's hope lay lifeless in Parkland Memorial Hospital. Within 2 hours, Lyndon Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One. Within 3 days, the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was dead, shot live on television by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby. And within 3 weeks, the nation began to realize that something deeper than one man's death had occurred. America had lost its innocence. Chapter 1. The Weight of Camelot. The idea of Camelot didn't exist until Kennedy's death. It was Jackie, soft-spoken, deliberate, and brilliant in her ability to shape memory, who told Life magazine, "There will be great presidents again, but there will never be another Camelot." She was grieving, but she was also building a myth. Before Dallas, Kennedy's presidency was young and uneven, a mixture of bold visions and dangerous gambles. The Bay of Pigs had humiliated the U.S., the Cuban Missile Crisis had nearly ended the world, and civil rights were tearing the nation apart. But he had youth, charisma, and something rarer still, the ability to make Americans believe again. Behind the scenes, the CIA was restless, the FBI was suspicious, the Pentagon distrusted his peace initiatives, and in the background, a Cold War that had no front line simmered in Berlin, Havana, and Washington alike. Every letter he received carried both love and threat. Every photograph was studied by both admirers and enemies. Every public appearance, like Dallas, was a calculated risk. What no one could have imagined was how that single moment in November would spiral outward, touching the CIA, the Mafia, the Soviet Union, Castro's Cuba, and even the hearts of ordinary Americans who began to question whether truth itself could be trusted again. Chapter 2. The Man Who Knew Too Much, Lee Harvey Oswald. The man who would change history forever was born in a rented room in New Orleans on October 18, 1939, fatherless before he could speak. Lee Harvey Oswald came into a world already fractured by war, poverty, and ideology. His father, Robert Oswald, Sr., had died 2 months before his birth. His mother, Marguerite, was restless, proud, and perpetually searching for stability she would never find. From his earliest days, Lee grew up moving from one small apartment to another, each less permanent than the last. He was a quiet child, withdrawn, suspicious, prone to daydreams of grandeur and grievance. Teachers described him as bright but detached. Classmates remembered him as the boy who preferred solitude over friendship. He read constantly,
Not comic books or pulp fiction like other boys his age, but the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. By 14, he had declared himself a Marxist. By 16, he had dropped out of school. The year was 1956. America was drunk on prosperity and paranoia. The Cold War had turned ideology into religion. And somewhere deep inside the teenage Oswald, a strange conviction formed. He was destined to matter. A Marine with a secret. In October 1956, at 17, Oswald enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He wanted structure, purpose, and perhaps, unconsciously, an identity larger than himself. The Marines gave him discipline, but also access to something else: secrets. He trained at El Toro, California, and later at Atsugi Air Base in Japan, one of the most sensitive American installations in the Pacific, home to the CIA's top-secret U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. It was there, among men who lived in the shadows of espionage, that Oswald began to take notes. He learned radar systems, flight patterns, and frequencies used by American spy planes. He asked questions, too many questions, about things Marines weren't supposed to wonder about. When his fellow soldiers teased him about his pro-Soviet opinions, Oswald didn't back down. "I'm a Marxist," he told one of them bluntly. "I think everyone should be." They laughed, but intelligence officers did not. Oswald was quietly marked. By the time he requested an early hardship discharge in 1959, the United States government already had a file on him, small but growing. 3 months later, the file would explode. Moscow, 1959. It was cold when he arrived. October 16, 1959. He had traveled through Helsinki on a 6-day visa, one of the few Western entry points into the Soviet Union. His passport said tourist. His intentions were anything but. At the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, a 20-year-old American stood before the startled duty officer and declared, "I am a Marxist. I wish to renounce my U.S. citizenship." The officer, Richard Snyder, had seen defectors before, but this one was different. Young, confident, oddly rehearsed. Oswald handed over his passport and announced his plan to offer the Soviet Union whatever military information he possesses. The KGB took notice. For weeks, Soviet authorities debated what to do with him. A Marine radar operator defecting with potential access to U-2 intelligence was valuable, but unpredictable. He was placed under psychiatric observation, monitored around the clock. Then, on November 2, 1959, when told his application for citizenship had been denied, Oswald slit his wrist in a Moscow hotel bathtub. It wasn't fatal, but it worked. The Soviets reconsidered. He was allowed to stay. Minsk. In January 1960, Oswald was relocated to Minsk, Belarus, an industrial city far from Moscow, where the KGB could keep him under discreet observation. He was given an apartment, a salary higher than most Soviet workers, and a job at a radio factory. He also got what he'd longed for: attention. Local newspapers featured the young American who turned his back on capitalism. He was invited to speak at youth clubs, to dine with party officials. But soon, the novelty faded. The reality of Soviet life, ration lines, censorship, and endless bureaucracy crushed the romantic image of Marxism he'd carried from New Orleans. He grew disillusioned, restless again. Then he met Marina Persakova, a 19-year-old pharmacy worker, poised and intelligent, the niece of a Soviet intelligence officer. They married after just 6 weeks. By 1961, Marina was pregnant. By 1962, Lee Harvey Oswald was once again demanding a new beginning. This time, he wanted to go back to America. Return to the Lion's Den. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow was astonished when Oswald reappeared, asking for his passport back. He claimed he had changed his mind about renouncing his citizenship. He now wanted to bring his Russian wife and child to America. The State Department granted it. In June 1962, the Oswalds arrived in Fort Worth, Texas. He had left America a defector. He returned an enigma. The FBI reopened its file. The CIA quietly monitored him, noting his Soviet marriage and his erratic political beliefs. To the public, though, he was invisible, another working-class ex-Marine trying to find his footing. But Oswald was already writing to leftist groups, ordering Marxist literature, and corresponding with pro-Castro organizations. In his mind, he was not a failure. He was a revolutionary waiting for the world to notice. He found work in menial jobs, argued politics with anyone who would listen, and eventually settled in Dallas, a city simmering with right-wing anger, anti-communist paranoia, and whispers of plots against the president. In the fall of 1963, Oswald found a new job at the Texas School Book Depository. From his window on the 6th floor, he could see Dealey Plaza. And from that window, on November 22, 1963, he would see the motorcade of the man he once claimed to admire, and perhaps envied most of all.
Chapter 3. The Perfect Storm, November 22, 1963. 8 a.m., Love Field. The sun rose clean over North Texas, pouring pale gold across the tarmac at Love Field. The weather forecast that morning read simply, clear skies, light breeze, temperature 68 degrees. A perfect day for a motorcade. Inside the presidential suite of the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth, John F. Kennedy was shaving, the rhythmic scrape of the razor matching the low hum of television news. Jackie, still in her robe, was reviewing her outfit one last time. She'd chosen the pink Chanel suit deliberately, vivid, camera-ready, and optimistic. Kennedy was in a good mood. The crowds in San Antonio and Houston had been large, even enthusiastic. Texas had been tricky for him, conservative Democrats, an undercurrent of hostility, but he believed that if people could just see him, shake his hand, look him in the eye, the tide would turn. At 8:45 a.m., he stepped out to greet the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. The air smelled of rain that never came. "There are no faint hearts in Fort Worth," he joked. The applause rolled like surf. By 11:37 a.m., Air Force One touched down at Dallas Love Field. The motorcade route was public, too public, many agents thought, but Kennedy refused to be hidden behind glass. "If somebody wants to shoot me from a window," he'd told an aide days earlier, "nobody can stop it, so why worry about it?" 11:55 a.m., the motorcade forms. The blue and white 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible waited, glistening in the light. Seating order, driver William Greer, Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman beside him. On the jump seats, Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie. The President and First Lady took the rear seat. 2 motorcycle patrols flanked them. A follow-up car carried 8 Secret Service agents. Thousands pressed along the route, children waving flags, office workers leaning from windows. Kennedy smiled continuously, leaning toward the crowds as the motorcade turned onto Main Street. 12:29 p.m., Elm Street. Dealey Plaza unfolded like a postcard. The triple underpass, the grassy knoll, the tall red brick Texas School Book Depository. The president's car had slowed to about 11 miles an hour to make the sharp turn from Houston onto Elm Street. Up on the 6th floor, behind a stack of textbooks near the southeast window, a 24-year-old ex-Marine adjusted the scope of his Mannlicher Carcamo. No one below saw him.
The sound of the first shot was strange, sharp, echoing, almost like a backfire. Secret Service agents froze, uncertain. Connolly turned slightly, puzzled. The second shot hit the president high in the back, exiting through his throat. Kennedy's hands rose to his neck. Governor Connolly, in front, felt something slam into his shoulder and chest. He fell into his wife's lap. The third shot, at 12:30 p.m., struck the president in the head. The pink mist hung an instant in the air before the scream. Jackie lunged toward the rear of the car, instinctively reaching for a fragment of her husband's skull. Agent Clint Hill sprinted from the follow-up car, climbed aboard, and pushed her back down. "Get us out of here," Kellerman shouted. Greer hit the accelerator. The Lincoln roared toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. 12:36 p.m., Parkland Hospital. The motorcade screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance. Doctors Charles Carrico and Malcolm Perry rushed forward. Kennedy was carried to Trauma Room 1. His face was ashen, eyes half open, the back of his head a wound too large to imagine. Outside, Jackie refused to let go of his hand. Her gloves were soaked in red. At 1 p.m., Dr. Perry stepped back, looked at the wall clock, and whispered, "The president is dead." Father Oscar Huber gave the final rites. The room fell silent except for the click of cameras outside and the muffled sobs of men who had guarded him for 3 years. 1:38 p.m., Air Force One. The casket, hastily sealed, was lifted aboard by Secret Service agents and staff. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, eyes rimmed with disbelief, stood in the cabin's center aisle. Beside him, Jacqueline Kennedy, still in her blood-stained suit, refused to change clothes. She said, "I want them to see what they've done." At 2:38 p.m., on the runway at Love Field, Federal Judge Sarah T. Hughes administered the oath of office. Johnson raised his right hand. Jacqueline stood beside him, expression hollow. A single flashbulb froze the moment. One president gone, another born. Meantime, 12:45 p.m. to 1:50 p.m. Back downtown, chaos reigned. Witness Howard Brennan told police he'd seen a man with a rifle in the 6th-floor window. Officers sealed the building. Inside, they found 3 shell casings and a rifle hidden between boxes. Lee Harvey Oswald was missing. By 1:15 p.m., Officer J.D. Tippett spotted a man matching the suspect's description walking along East 10th Street. Tippett pulled over. Words were exchanged. No one knows exactly what. Oswald drew a revolver and fired 4 times. Tippett fell dead in the street. At 1:50 p.m., police cornered Oswald inside the Texas Theater. The film was War is Hell. After a brief scuffle, they dragged him out, shouting, "I am not resisting arrest." In his pocket, 5 cartridges. At police headquarters, a face that would soon circle the world. Evening, shockwaves. By nightfall, television networks had interrupted every broadcast. Anchors struggled to stay composed as grainy footage replayed the motorcade and the panic in Dealey Plaza. Across America, strangers wept in diners and living rooms. In Moscow, the Kremlin issued a carefully worded statement of condolence. In Havana, Castro ordered his staff to maintain radio silence, no gloating, no comment. In Washington, Hoover's FBI went into overdrive. Every agency demanded answers. But already, behind the grief, the questions began. How could a man who defected to the Soviet Union return so easily? Why were security routes published in advance? And who, if anyone, really pulled the trigger? The perfect Texas morning had turned into the most scrutinized afternoon in modern history. Chapter 4. The Hunt for a Lone Gunman. The Capture and Interrogation of Lee Harvey Oswald. 1:50 p.m., November 22nd, 1963. Texas Theater, Oak Cliff. The movie house was half dark. a reel of War is Hell flickering against the silver screen. In the rows behind a scattering of matinee watchers, a wiry young man shifted in his seat. He had slipped in without a ticket, muttered something, and moved again. The ticket taker, suspicious, phoned police. Within minutes, patrol cars swarmed Jefferson Boulevard. Officers crept down the aisles with pistols drawn. "Get your hands up!" someone barked. The man stood, furious. "This is it!" he shouted, and swung a fist. A shot rang out. A policeman's cheek was grazed. Then the suspect was wrestled down, disarmed, handcuffed. His name, he said, was Lee Harvey Oswald. Dallas Police Headquarters, 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. The prisoner was marched through the side entrance of the red brick Dallas Police and Courts building at 201 Harwood. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Did you kill the president?" "I haven't been charged with that," he snapped back. "I work in that building." Captain Will Fritz, head of homicide and robbery, led him to the third-floor interrogation room, a narrow office with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a humming fluorescent light. Oswald sat, arms folded, chin high. What followed was one of the most chaotic interrogations in modern law enforcement. Over the next 45 hours, Oswald was questioned by Dallas police, the FBI, and the Secret Service, often without a lawyer. There were no recordings, no signed confession, only officers' notes and conflicting recollections. He denied everything. "I don't know what this is all about," he told Fritz. "They're accusing me of killing a policeman. I know nothing about that." When confronted with the rifle recovered from the depository, he said calmly, "That's ridiculous. I don't own a rifle." But he did. Records showed that a 6.5mm Mannlicher Carcano rifle had been ordered under the alias Heidel. In his wallet, police found a forged identity card bearing that same name. As each fact surfaced, the photo of Oswald holding the rifle, the alias, the Russian wife, his composure cracked, then recovered. He was angry, sarcastic, convinced he was being framed. "I'm just a patsy," he said once, the line that would echo for decades. Meanwhile, the evidence mounts. At the book depository, investigators measured the height of the 6th-floor window, photographed dispensed shell casings, dusted for prints. On the rifle's barrel, they found a partial palm print, later matched to Oswald. The brown paper bag used to conceal the weapon bore fibers identical to those on his shirt. Ballistics would later confirm that the bullets recovered from the president's car and Governor Connolly's stretcher had been fired from that same rifle to the exclusion of all others. Still, questions multiplied faster than answers. How had Oswald, a known defector, managed to re-enter the United States unchallenged? Why did the Secret Service accept such a dangerous open route? And why did the first suspect in presidential assassination also happen to be a man on both the FBI and CIA's radar? Late evening, November 22nd. Oswald's face was now on every television set in America. Crowds gathered outside the police station, chanting, "Kill the commie." Inside, Chief Jesse Curry held press conferences between interrogations, his voice cracking from exhaustion. Agents from Washington were already en route. The FBI wanted custody. The Secret Service wanted jurisdiction. The Dallas police refused to relinquish their prisoner until formal charges were filed. At 11:26 p.m., Lee Harvey Oswald was officially charged with the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. At 11:30 p.m., he was charged with the murder of President John F. Kennedy. He spent the night in cell number 4, a narrow concrete box with a steel cot. He asked for nothing but a cup of coffee. Saturday, November 23rd, the interrogations continue. Captain Fritz returned early. Reporters lined the hallway, television cables coiled across the floor. Every time Oswald was moved, 100 lenses followed. He continued to deny all charges. When told that his palm print matched the rifle, he said flatly, "That's mistaken." When asked why he shot Officer Tippit, he shook his head. "I didn't shoot anybody." Fritz scribbled in his notebook, defiant, intelligent, calm. Outside, the official machinery of grief turned. Kennedy's body lay in the East Room of the White House. The Warren family prepared for burial in Arlington. Johnson met with the cabinet as the nation tried to breathe again. In Dallas, the man at the center of it all stared through the bars of his cell, unreadable. Sunday morning, November 24th, the transfer. Plans were made to move Oswald to the county jail for safety. At 11:20 a.m., escorted by detectives, he stepped into the basement garage of police headquarters. Cameras rolled live for national television. As he was led forward, a man in a dark suit lunged from the crowd. A single shot. Oswald collapsed, gasping. Reporters screamed. The gunman was wrestled to the floor. Jack Ruby, local nightclub owner, self-proclaimed patriot, friend of half the Dallas police force. An ambulance rushed Oswald to Parkland Hospital, the same emergency room where Kennedy had been pronounced dead 48 hours earlier. At 1:07 p.m., doctors recorded a second death. Aftermath. The suspect was gone. The questions remained. Within days, President Johnson ordered the creation of a special commission to investigate, chaired by Chief Justice Earl Warren. The FBI completed its 888-page report in record time, concluding that Oswald had acted alone. The public never accepted it fully. In less than 72 hours, America had lost a president, a policeman, and the only man who might have explained why.
Chapter 5. The Warren Commission. Truth, Doubt, and the Birth of American Conspiracy. Washington, D.C., November 29, 1963. Only 1 week had passed since the motorcade in Dallas, yet Washington already felt decades older. Flags still hung at half-staff. The corridors of the White House smelled of flowers and candle smoke. President Lyndon B. Johnson, newly sworn in and desperate for order, summoned his advisors to the Oval Office. America, he told them, needed certainty. Rumors were multiplying. Soviet agents, Hugan revenge, rogue CIA officers, even whispers of a second gunman on the grassy knoll. We can't have 180 million Americans thinking their government's lying to them, Johnson said. That afternoon, he signed Executive Order 11130, creating a 7-member panel to ascertain, evaluate, and report upon the facts. Chief Justice Earl Warren, a reluctant appointee, would lead it. Other members included Senators Richard Russell and John Sherman Cooper, Representatives Hale Boggs and Gerald Ford, former CIA Director Allen Dulles, and banker John McCloy. It was, on paper, a bipartisan dream team. In practice, it was the beginning of half a century of mistrust. The task. The Commission's mandate was breathtakingly broad. Reconstruct the assassination, analyze ballistic evidence, track Oswald's entire life, and determine whether he had acted alone or in concert with others. Within days, 26 volumes of testimony and exhibits began to accumulate. Police logs, autopsy photos, intelligence cables, FBI field reports. Warren set up offices in a drab suite of rooms inside the Veterans Administration Building. Lawyers worked 12-hour days under fluorescent light, surrounded by stacks of manila folders marked confidential. Yet from the outset, tension crackled between agencies. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, had already drafted its own conclusions. Oswald, acting alone, fired 3 shots. The case was closed. The CIA offered fragments.
memoranda hinting at Oswald's pro-Castro leaflets in New Orleans, his trip to Mexico City, his visits to the Cuban and Soviet embassies, but withheld full surveillance files. The Secret Service guarded its internal procedures like state secrets. Every witness seemed to tell a slightly different story. The Zapruder film, a jittery 26-second home movie, contradicted official diagrams. Autopsy doctors at Bethesda disagreed on the exact entry wound. A single bullet, Commission Exhibit 399, was said to have passed through both Kennedy and Governor Connally, breaking bones, yet emerging nearly pristine. To skeptics, it became the magic bullet. Behind closed doors. Warren, haunted by the memory of McCarthy-era hysteria, believed that transparency could prevent national panic, but Johnson and Hoover insisted on secrecy until the report was complete. Transcripts were typed by hand. Drafts were locked in safes each night. Allen Dulles, the only member with deep intelligence experience, kept reminding colleagues that coincidences are the hardest thing to prove. He defended the CIA's omissions, citing national security. Senator Russell, a Southern conservative, distrusted the whole enterprise. Gerald Ford quietly served as the White House's eyes and ears, reporting progress back to Johnson. Marina Oswald appeared before the panel 24 times. Her testimony painted her husband as volatile, ideological, and often violent, yet she swore she never believed him capable of killing a president. Jack Ruby was interviewed in his Dallas jail cell. He pleaded to be moved to Washington, claiming, "My life's in danger here. You'll never know the whole truth unless I can tell it in person." The request was denied. September 24, 1964. The report. 10 months after Dallas, the Warren Commission delivered an 888-page summary and 26 volumes of evidence. Its central findings were: Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of President Kennedy. Jack Ruby acted alone in killing Oswald. There was no credible evidence of a domestic or foreign conspiracy. The single bullet theory best explained the wounds to both Kennedy and Connally. Johnson addressed the nation. The conspiracy theorists are a threat to the peace of mind of this country. We have the truth. The public wanted to believe him, but belief proved fragile. Doubt. Within weeks, discrepancies leaked. Doctors at Parkland disputed autopsy descriptions. Dealey Plaza witnesses swore they'd heard shots from the knoll. Photographs released to the press seemed inconsistent with the report's diagrams. Mark Lane, a New York attorney, published Rush to Judgment, 1966, arguing that the commission had ignored key witnesses. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison launched his own investigation, claiming a network of anti-Castro operatives and intelligence assets had plotted the murder. Magazines, films, and late-night radio shows turned the lone gunman into America's first great modern myth. More damaging than any theory was the pattern of withheld truth. The CIA later admitted that it had concealed plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. Hoover's FBI had edited field reports before handing them to the commission. Each revelation, small on its own, deepened the sense that the real story lay just out of reach. The birth of permanent skepticism. Before 1963, most Americans assumed their government told the truth. After 1963, most assumed it didn't. The assassination fractured public faith in official narratives and created a new national reflex: to doubt first, verify later. From Vietnam body counts to Watergate tapes, from the Pentagon Papers to the Iran-Contra hearings, the same question echoed. If they could hide the truth about Dallas, what else are they hiding? The Warren Report, intended to heal, became the seedbed of modern conspiracy culture. It taught a generation how to read between the lines, how to mistrust authority, how to connect dots even when none existed. And so, in seeking to close the case, the commission opened something far larger, a permanent wound in the American imagination.
Chapter 6. Echoes of Dallas, From Johnson to Nixon. The Assassination's Shadow over American Power. 1964 to 1968, The Burden of Inheritance. Lyndon Baines Johnson had entered the presidency by tragedy, not election. In the first months after Dallas, he moved like a man pursued by ghosts. He pushed through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, fulfilling Kennedy's pledge, but the cost was high. The Democratic South began to fracture. Every meeting with advisors seemed haunted by the question no one voiced aloud. Would Kennedy have done it this way? Johnson's inner circle called it the shadow of the martyr. When he spoke of Dallas, Johnson's drawl hardened. Privately, he admitted to close aides that he never fully trusted the conclusions of the Warren Commission. Publicly, he defended it without reservation. "I don't think I could stand another commission," he told Senator Russell. "The country's had enough doubt." But doubt could not be legislated away. The Gulf of Tonkin. In August 1964, U.S. destroyers patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin off Vietnam reported being attacked by enemy torpedo boats. The facts were murky, the radar readings uncertain. Yet the event was framed as clear aggression. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving Johnson authority to take all necessary measures. It marked the beginning of full-scale American involvement in Vietnam. For the first time since Dallas, the tone of government briefings echoed that day's confusion, fragmented reports, conflicting eyewitness accounts, intelligence gaps. The public, still raw from the assassination, found it easier to suspect manipulation. Each new escalation in Vietnam, each discrepancy between official statements and battlefield reality, tightened the knot of mistrust first tied in 1963. 1968. Two more shots. In April 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in Memphis. 2 months later, Senator Robert F. Kennedy was killed in Los Angeles. The repetition felt unbearable. To many, it seemed the country itself was unraveling, the same mixture of idealism and violence, the same unanswered questions, the same feeling that history had slipped out of ordinary control. Television carried it all live. Dallas was the first American tragedy fully mediated by the screen. 1968 made it a permanent channel. When Johnson declined to run for re-election, he cited the divisions of the country. In truth, he carried Dallas with him like a scar. He retired to his ranch in Texas, where friends said he replayed footage of the motorcade more than once. Nixon and the Politics of Secrecy. Richard Nixon's rise in 1968 brought a familiar face back to power. He had been in Dallas on the morning of November 22nd, attending a Pepsi-Cola board meeting, and he understood how the assassination had changed the political psyche. He also understood the uses of secrecy. Nixon created new intelligence channels that bypassed formal agencies, convinced that leaks and disloyalty had destroyed previous administrations. He distrusted the CIA. "Those fellows have things they don't want us to know," he told H.R. Haldeman, and relied instead on private investigators and plumbers. When the Pentagon Papers surfaced in 1971, revealing years of official deception about Vietnam, the reflex of doubt born in 1963 exploded into full cynicism. "They've been lying since Dallas," one protest sign read. Watergate followed not long after. When tapes confirmed that the president himself had directed cover-ups,
It seemed the final proof that secrecy had devoured the system meant to preserve it. The Church and Rockefeller investigations. By the mid-1970s, the Senate's Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission reopened the question of government truthfulness. They uncovered covert operations, domestic surveillance, and plots to assassinate foreign leaders, including Fidel Castro. The revelations did not directly link to Kennedy's death, but they confirmed a deeper pattern. Agencies capable of hiding vast operations from elected oversight. For a public long suspicious since the Warren Report, the findings were vindication. Dallas wasn't the beginning of conspiracy, but it was the moment Americans learned to look for one, Senator Frank Church said. Legacy. Between 1963 and 1976, nearly every crisis of American politics bore the echo of Dealey Plaza. It lived in the cautious phrasing of press briefings, in the rise of investigative journalism, in the new skepticism of every official story. Out of that silence on Elm Street had grown a permanent feedback loop. Government secrecy breeding public suspicion justifying further secrecy. The assassination had been, in one sense, a single act of violence. In another, it was the event that made faith itself a casualty.
Chapter 7. The Age of Revelation, from the Church Committee to Oliver Stone. 1975 to 1976. The Church Committee. By the mid-1970s, Americans had endured Vietnam, Watergate, and the resignation of a president. Public trust in government was fractured, and questions about November 22, 1963, resurfaced with renewed urgency. The Church Committee, officially the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, was formed in 1975 under Senator Frank Church. Its mandate: investigate abuses by the CIA, FBI, NSA, and other intelligence agencies. The committee revealed startling truths: assassination plots against foreign leaders, domestic surveillance of political dissidents, and covert operations undertaken without congressional oversight. While no evidence directly implicated the CIA or FBI in Kennedy's death, the revelations confirmed what many had long suspected. Governmental secrecy was systemic, and the public had been misled. For many Americans, the Church Committee did more than expose wrongdoing. It validated the doubts planted in Dealey Plaza 12 years earlier. Dallas, once a site of national mourning, now became the symbolic starting point of an era in which truth could never again be taken at face value. Media and pop culture. Dallas in the public imagination. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, journalists, authors, and filmmakers revisited the Kennedy assassination with renewed intensity. Books like Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment and Jim Garrison's Investigations fed a growing appetite for alternative explanations. Television documentaries reenacted the motorcade, interviewed witnesses, and aired Zapruder's film frame by frame, giving the public unprecedented visual access to the event. By 1991, Oliver Stone's JFK would transform Dallas into a cultural phenomenon. Stone's film fused real events with compelling narrative theory, presenting the assassination as a multifaceted conspiracy spanning intelligence agencies, organized crime, and political operatives. Though controversial, the film cemented Dallas in the collective consciousness as more than a city. It became a symbol of hidden power, lost innocence, and enduring skepticism. Public obsession. The American fascination with Kennedy's death evolved into a national pastime of sorts. Conspiracy theories, multiple gunmen, mafia involvement, CIA plots, Soviet or Cuban interference,
No idea was too far-fetched. Document analyses. Scholars and hobbyists examined the Zapruder film frame by frame, debated angles of trajectories, and recreated Dealey Plaza in painstaking detail. Political lessons. The assassination became a reference point for evaluating executive transparency, Secret Service protocols, and the role of the media in covering national tragedy. Dallas itself capitalized on this fascination. Tours of Dealey Plaza, the Texas School Book Depository, now the 6th Floor Museum, and annual commemorations turned the city into both shrine and classroom, a place where history and legend collided. The legacy of public skepticism. The Church Committee and subsequent revelations did not just fuel speculation about Dallas, they reshaped American politics. Investigative journalism. The era birthed a new breed of reporter willing to challenge official narratives, exemplified by Woodward and Bernstein's Watergate reporting. Legislative oversight. Congressional intelligence oversight committees were strengthened, with mandatory reporting requirements designed to prevent future abuses. Cultural narratives. Dallas became shorthand for the collapse of innocence and the rise of suspicion, referenced in novels, films, songs, and political speeches. By the 1990s, the assassination had transcended history. It was no longer only an event. It was a prism through which Americans examined power, secrecy, and morality. Dallas as national myth. Dealey Plaza, once an ordinary civic space, had been transformed into a national touchstone. Every photograph, every building, every frame of film was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Scholars debated angles, historians contested timelines, and theorists argued motives. In this way, the assassination of John F. Kennedy became more than a tragedy. It became a mirror for American society, reflecting both its ideals and its anxieties, its hope and its paranoia. Dallas had achieved a new kind of immortality. The city, the event, and the mystery had entered the public imagination as a narrative that could never truly be closed.
Chapter 8. Conspiracy and Closure. The Assassination in American Memory from the 1990s to today. 1992 to 1995. Declassified Documents and the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act. Decades after November 22, 1963, interest in Kennedy's assassination remained intense. Public pressure for transparency culminated in the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, signed by President George H.W. Bush. The act created a centralized repository in the National Archives for all government documents related to the assassination. The goal was straightforward: provide full disclosure and allow historians, journalists, and the public to examine the evidence for themselves. By 1995, tens of thousands of files had been transferred to the Assassination Records Review Board. Previously classified CIA, FBI, and Secret Service documents revealed surveillance of Lee Oswald prior to 1963, including Oswald's visit to the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City. Internal memoranda detailing potential threats to Kennedy, some from domestic extremists. Evidence of intelligence communication failures, missed warning signs, and conflicting agency reports. Yet, despite the unprecedented access, some documents remained redacted or withheld for national security. Even in this new era of disclosure, Americans still debated what had truly happened. Conspiracy theories persist. The release of these documents did not resolve controversy, it fueled it. The 1990s and 2000s saw a proliferation of books, documentaries, and internet forums, each proposing different theories. Multiple shooters. Advocates pointed to Zapruder film analysis and witness testimonies suggesting shots from the grassy knoll. Government complicity. Some claimed CIA or FBI involvement to protect Cold War secrets or prevent Kennedy's diplomatic strategies. Organized crime. Connections between Jack Ruby and Dallas criminal networks were examined in greater detail. Foreign actors. Cuba and the Soviet Union were frequently implicated, though no credible evidence confirmed direct involvement. By the new millennium, the Kennedy assassination had evolved into a cultural touchstone for skepticism. Americans did not simply ask, who killed Kennedy? They asked, what could we ever truly know about power, secrecy, and truth? Media and memory. Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK had set the stage, but the 1990s introduced a new wave of media engagement. Documentaries like The Men Who Killed Kennedy and publications such as Vincent Bugliosi's Reclaiming History sought to either debunk or validate the myriad claims surrounding Dallas. The public's engagement was unprecedented. School curricula, museum exhibits, and public commemorations ensured that new generations confronted the assassination not just as history, but as a lens for understanding government, media, and collective memory. Declassification and the 21st century. Even into the 2000s and 2010s, document releases continued. The 2017 and 2018 releases of previously classified CIA and FBI files prompted headlines but also reinforced uncertainty. While nothing conclusively contradicted the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone, ambiguities remained. Scholars noted a key lesson. Full transparency might not resolve doubt, but it preserves the process of scrutiny. In other words, the assassination continues to serve as a test case for how a democracy handles sensitive, traumatic events. Dallas as living history. Dealey Plaza itself has become both shrine and classroom. Millions visit the sixth-floor museum each year, examining artifacts, photographs, and the Zapruder film. Visitors often confront the tension between what is known and what is unknown. They see Kennedy's pink suit, Oswald's rifle, Ruby's pistol, tangible remnants of a moment frozen in time. It is here that the Kennedy assassination transforms from historical event to living memory. It is not just about bullets and windows, or about politics and ideology. It is about how a society confronts loss, secrecy, and the fragility of trust. The assassination in American consciousness. By the 21st century, the assassination had achieved dual significance. Historical. Kennedy's death shaped U.S. politics, influencing civil rights, the Vietnam War, and the evolution of intelligence oversight. Cultural. The event became the archetype of modern skepticism, inspiring literature, film, journalism, and civic debate about government transparency. From the Zapruder film to online forums, from museum tours to scholarly conferences, Dallas remains the point where history, memory, and myth intersect. Americans continue to grapple with November 22, 1963, not simply as an event in the past, but as a mirror reflecting the ongoing tension between power and truth.
Chapter 9. The Man Behind the Myth. Kennedy's Legacy and the Enduring Questions of Dallas. The President and His Vision. John F. Kennedy's presidency was brief, just 1,000 days. Yet in that span, he sought to reshape America's trajectory. Civil rights, space exploration, Cold War diplomacy, and economic modernization were all pillars of his vision. He inspired a sense of possibility, famously urging Americans in his 1961 inaugural address, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Kennedy's charisma and eloquence created the aura of Camelot, a label immortalized by Jackie Kennedy. But beyond the legend, Kennedy faced relentless opposition, complex global threats, and domestic polarization. His policy decisions were not always flawless. The Bay of Pigs invasion had failed disastrously. and tensions with the Soviet Union brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Yet his ideals, particularly regarding civil rights and international diplomacy, left a lasting imprint. The Shadow of Dallas. Dallas, November 22, 1963, forever altered how Americans understood leadership and mortality. The assassination transformed Kennedy into a mythic figure, a symbol of hope cut tragically short. Yet the shadow also raised enduring questions. Could a single individual, Oswald, truly have acted alone? Did intelligence agencies or political actors fail to protect the president? How much of what Americans were told reflected the truth, and how much was shaped by image, narrative, or convenience? These questions became embedded in American consciousness, informing skepticism toward government, shaping political discourse, and influencing media coverage of every subsequent national tragedy. The legacy of leadership. Kennedy's impact extended far beyond Dallas. Civil rights. While Johnson passed landmark legislation, Kennedy's moral and political leadership laid the foundation. His support for desegregation, even when politically risky, set a precedent for the federal government's role in advancing equality. Space exploration. Kennedy's commitment to landing a man on the moon by 1969 galvanized NASA and inspired a generation of scientists and engineers. "We choose to go to the moon," he said in 1962, signaling the audacity of American ambition. Cold War diplomacy. The Cuban Missile Crisis revealed Kennedy's capacity for measured leadership under extreme pressure. His decisions averted nuclear conflict, proving the value of careful negotiation alongside military readiness. Political culture. Kennedy's style, televised debates, youth outreach, and public optimism transformed the relationship between the presidency and the American public, shaping modern media politics. The enduring questions. Despite historical documentation, analysis, and declassified files, the Kennedy assassination remains a locus of mystery. Americans continue to debate. Oswald's motives. Was he driven solely by ideology, personal grievance, or something else? Government transparency. Could full disclosure ever resolve doubts, or is skepticism inherent to democratic society? Memory versus myth. How much of Kennedy's legacy reflects his real accomplishments, and how much has been magnified by the trauma of Dallas? Each generation reinterprets the events of November 22, 1963, through its own lens. In classrooms, museums, films, and scholarly works, Kennedy's life and death serve as both history and moral touchstone. Dallas as symbol. Dealey Plaza continues to symbolize the intersection of hope, violence, and public scrutiny. The sixth-floor museum preserves artifacts and narratives, allowing visitors to confront the past while grappling with the unknowable elements. The assassination also illustrates a broader truth about America. National identity is inseparable from the stories we tell about our leaders, our tragedies, and the institutions that govern us. Kennedy's death, therefore, is not only a historical event, but a cultural prism. Through it, Americans examine the nature of power, the fragility of trust, and the enduring human need to seek truth, even when certainty is impossible. Conclusion. John F. Kennedy remains, paradoxically, both man and myth. His achievements, vision, and leadership are well documented. His death remains an enduring puzzle, a symbol of vulnerability and mystery. Dallas transformed the nation's understanding of tragedy and secrecy, leaving questions that will never fully vanish. But perhaps that is fitting. In remembering Kennedy and grappling with what we cannot know, Americans continue to define themselves, their values, and their relationship to history.
The story of Kennedy, Oswald, and Dallas is more than a single moment in time. It is a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, and doubts of a nation stretching from November 1963 to the present day, and likely into the future.